For more, we go to Havana and Emily Morris, Honorary Senior Research Associate at University College London's Institute of the Americas. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
I hope you don't mind me beginning with a personal question. If you are leaving the island anytime soon, and if so, how?
Well, I'm flying Air France, and they're very efficient, and they'll be taking me via Nassau to refuel. It was a very straightforward message I had from them, and I just had to confirm my flight. I have to arrive at the airport a couple of hours early, that's all.
What's it been like in Havana the last week? There's a real feeling that it's really beginning to bite, this fuel embargo.
Yeah, I mean, the announcement last week was kind of preparing people for the worst, really, and demonstrating that the government is seeking to prioritize supplies. It was quite interesting. Before that happened, people were very blasé about it. And so in a way that the statement made sure that people understand the seriousness of the situation. So what we've had since Diaz-Canel's speech or his press meeting was the a lot of events have been curtailed. We've got warnings that there's going to be more power cuts. Transport fuel is scarce now. You can't get it in Cuban pesos. So people have to pay an awful lot more for it. And so there obviously people are traveling less. Public transport has been curtailed. So the available electricity is being used to prioritize. And I think even the bigger problem than electricity, because half of that is generated from domestic sources, the biggest problem is actually transport and to some extent industry. And so there's an attempt now to prioritize the allocation of all of those things, and it's causing a lot of hardship, a lot of difficulty for a lot of people. So yeah, no, I think in your clip, the man said, the big worry is the degree of uncertainty. They don't know what's going to happen next. So at the moment, things are pretty normal. People aren't getting around as much. It's hard to do transport. Universities are moved on to remote working, a lot of employment, a lot of workplaces have done the same. So there's all of those sort of things, but what happens next is a big issue.
Yeah, Cuba's proven its resilience in the past, most notably after the fall of the Soviet Union, when they were in similar dire straits. And the communist-led nations always rebounded. What's the plan this time? Venezuela is not going to come to the rescue anymore. Mexico can't export oil. Do they give a little bit with the United States? Do they? What's the plan?
Well, the plan is to, ration everything and to live within their means. Okay, so they do produce oil, which, as I said, oil together with gas, together with solar energy, provides about half of the electricity that they need. So they do have some electricity. And I think this is one example of the kind of groupthink that's going on in the US. So many times they have stated that Cuba is completely dependent on Venezuela. It was heavily dependent on Venezuela for the last few years. It's been reducing its dependence on Venezuela. They do have their own source of electricity supply. And there's also this groupthink also applies to the food situation. This statistic of 90% of food being imported is very out of date. It only applies to the government purchases for the ration system. There is a lot of food now being grown in Cuba. So there's a lot of kind of myths about Cuba's resilience. And I think in a way that kind of led the US to take a path which is not going to produce the result that they expect within the time frame that they expect, because even if Cuba doesn't have any deliveries of oil, which is a strong assumption, but it's possible, it's quite possible, they would still be able to manage to survive.
So what are the possible scenarios, Emily Morse?
Well, I suppose the possible scenarios are that, that under these conditions, there will be centralization of control of resources. That's inevitable. It always happens. Any country in war would do that. So there will be greater centralization, which is ironic in a way, because there has been a lot of movement towards the private sector, towards opening out the economy, towards liberalizing reforms. That's going to be halted for the moment. So the most likely outcome is that there's going to be a standoff. I think that seems to be the most likely outcome. There'll be frustration in the US that they haven't achieved their ends. There'll be hardship in Cuba. And there'll be growing disquiet internationally and disquiet within Cuba. I mean, this is what the US is thinking, is that this will push the Cuban population over the edge. But since this hardship is the direct result of US action, it's a bit more difficult today than it was a few weeks ago to blame the Cuban government for what's happening. In fact, it's going to lead to more dependence on the Cuban government to provide basic needs. So it's not going to achieve the ends, but it's going to cause an awful lot of suffering. What will happen in the end? I suppose there will be talks. That's another kind of piece of groupthink or misrepresentation that they're saying that the Cuban government is now willing to talk thanks to the pressure from the US. The Cuban government's position has not changed at all. They've always said they're willing to talk, but without conditions. For them, it's not an option to surrender. So they're going to talk about, as they did under Obama, about themes of mutual interest, like anti-terrorism, which they've always done. I mean, the justification that Cuba is a security threat to the United States is like the opposite of true. What they're doing now is a security threat to the United States, because this is probably likely to lead to a migration crisis. And if they